There's a thing called freedom, and it's very, very important. Free to think anything and do anything. Any restrictions is a sadness, and it can kill creativity.
As a painter, David Lynch brought a true artistic mindset to cinema. In an industry dominated by formula, story structure, rewrites, test screenings, and recuts, investors will do whatever it takes to iron out the creases and make their product more appealing to the masses. These formulas, these rules, are followed because, most of the time, they work. In many ways, the better filmmakers get at following the prevailing formulas, the more they're honing their craft, as you need to know the rules before you earn the right to break them. But Lynch viewed the medium differently, stating, "I don't know why people expect art to make sense. They accept the fact that life doesn't make sense." This is why Lynch's movies are not for everyone, or for any mood. They require a certain openness to experience, and more of an appreciation of moments and impressions than story or character arcs. His best works are more of an exploration of the subconscious than they are even narratives. A Rorschach test with no wrong answers.
When things get abstract or a little bit abstract, there's room for many interpretations, and each person should be able to make up his or her mind to feel what the things mean.
It's up to whoever's writing or whoever's viewing to make up their own mind about what's going on.
Unlike many directors, David abided by the philosophy of the death of the author, that once a piece of work is released to the public, the work takes on a life of its own, shaped by each reader's interpretation, because no work is complete without the individual experiencing it. Therefore, it's not the author's job to tell the reader what's right or wrong, as they only know what their work is meant to be, not what it actually is. Instead, it's up to the reader to question why they personally see it that way, as no two people will interpret any story, image, or sound exactly the same, and what they interpret may say more about them than the art itself. So by dealing in such abstraction, of stories that appear to start and go nowhere or don't quite make coherent sense, Lynch is willfully abandoning any attempt at consensus, and instead capturing the subjective essence of dreams and nightmares. As when you're watching his films, your mind feels as if it's unraveling a mystery, constantly having to ask yourself, what's going on? What does this mean? Who was that? Why did that happen? Essentially forcing the viewer to intuitively engage in dream analysis. Because if you ever try to describe the order of events in most of Lynch's movies, you'll sound as if you're remembering a dream. And then I was walking through this weird dark place and I was scared, but then you were there. But you weren't you, you had a different name now, but I knew it was you. And then we went somewhere together and there was a man in this weird place and there was nothing else in there. He told me something cryptic, but I don't remember why. This isn't to say that every scene is bewildering, as many flow in the entertaining manner that films generally do. There can even be a narrative, but there's often little consistency from one scene to the next. You could be going anywhere and experiencing anything, with little tying it together other than a mysterious sense of theme. Lynch was a surrealist, the Salvador Dali of cinema. Everything always feels somewhat offbeat. He liked to show his characters waking up in bed, floating in space, walking through dark landscapes alone. Or hone in on feelings of intense connection, even with strangers, that we all sometimes sense in our day-to-day life but can't explain. Do you know this person? No, but I saw them once, more than I normally see most people. He also had an obsession with roads, doorways, and curtains. As roads can lead anywhere, doors symbolize the entrance into another world, and curtains can either part ways to reveal an alternative reality, or emphasize the peculiar feeling that the characters are on stage, that what we are witnessing is artificial. His locations were often wide open spaces, rooms that don't quite make sense, with curtained walls and checkerboard or zigzag floors, giving the impression we're in a sort of limbo or other place outside our understanding. But while David created this fascinating imagery for our subconscious to chew on, every picture is incomplete without the sound underscoring it, as the audio can influence us to the point it reframes our understanding of what's happening.
It's sound and picture flowing together in time. Its sound is so important. If you find some sound or something like that that says a mood, then you try to get the picture to go with that.
From his earliest works, The Grandmother and Eraserhead, it was clear that Lynch didn't want to use sound to simply capture the action. He wanted to use it to create an atmosphere and tap into the deeper subconscious themes of the piece. For instance, in The Grandmother, none of the characters can speak, only bark, which uncomfortably makes us recognize ourselves as just another animal in the food chain. In Eraserhead, which is filled with the haunting sound of a baby crying, the distant thudding of an industrial factory, and a blustering wind, my favourite detail is how he twists the groaning sound of a radiator into this high-pitched rustling, so it feels like it's infested with a hive of insects or birds. This makes what could be just another forgotten feature of our homes feel both alive and riddled with dread. He was fascinated with how sound would introduce itself and die away, and how those appearances and disappearances could influence an audience. A perfect example of this is the famous Winky's diner scene in Mulholland Drive, which is one of Lynch's most career-defining sequences. With unsettling suspense music grinding away in the background, Dan sits down with his friend to tell him about a recurring dream he's had twice already. The dream ends with him going out to the back of this very diner and seeing a man with a face that terrifies him. His friend understands that Dan wants to find out if the man is really there or just in his dreams. But then when Dan turns to the counter, he sees his friend standing there just like how he described in his dream. And now we don't know if we're in the third version of his recurring nightmare, or in reality. The glowing light outside the windows might hint it's a dream, but how are we to know? Then when his friend opens the door to the overexposed exterior, now sound floods in, the echoing blur of passing traffic. Dan then leads his friend around back, Lynch dragging us through the suspense from a point of view angle as we get closer and closer to the spot, unsure if or when this face is going to appear. And then just as he creeps up to the final corner, this sound is designed to capture Dan's emotional state as he collapses to the ground, which is this sort of muted internal explosion, followed by the echoing blurred audio of his friend calling out his name. But it sounds as if he's underwater, as he's lost somewhere deep inside himself. The entire sequence is reminiscent of a sleep paralysis demon, where we can't move but are faced with a mysterious, ominous presence that may mean us harm, yet we remain frozen still, unable to protect ourselves. The scene is a masterclass in suspense, outlining exactly what usually happens in this scenario, and then dragging the audience through the torture of finding out if it's going to reoccur. Lynch is really just playing a game with the audience here. If we are in a dream, it's going to happen, and if we aren't, then it still might. But by using ethereal lighting and distorted sound effects, he's upping the ante, so that the viewer starts to realize that this surely is a dream and they're about to get a fright, just like Dan. David Lynch's work always had that dreamlike quality to it. But while dreams can be enjoyable, safe and satisfying, they can also transform into nightmares that echo our deepest fears and regrets. This is the yin and yang, the contrast that he's drawn to exposing. Nothing can exist without its opposite. Behind every beautiful dream lingers an ugly nightmare. For example, would our dreams of success mean as much if it weren't for the risk of crippling failure? We see this explored in Mulholland Drive, set in LA, the city of dreamers.
And now I'm in this dream place.
And the elderly couple that gleefully cheer Betty on in the beginning and tell her they'll be looking out for her on the big screen are now the very faces that haunt her in the end, as what once felt like inspirational support now feels like pressure, embarrassment, and regret. So Lynch juxtaposes laughter and screaming, the opposing emotional sounds of dreams and nightmares.
Cinema is a lot like music, that it has movements and it needs to be fast in this area and slow in this. When all the elements are going together, you can get a thing. I always say the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Since his death, I think it's worth everyone looking back over some of David Lynch's greatest films to experience the moods, reflections, and moments he left behind. Work that, for the most part, he refused to ever explain, as your interpretations of what he created are just as valid as his own. And that's what will allow his films to continue to resonate long after he's gone. A sense of unresolved mystery, questions that can never be fully answered. Unlike other directors, Lynch started off as a painter, so he approaches film very differently to his contemporaries. They mostly just wanted to pull you into their story, whereas David wanted to take you deep into your own subconscious, somewhere between time and space where dreams take place, and hopes that you find a part of yourself somewhere between his brushstrokes. So if you made it this far, firstly, thank you for watching. But if you could now click like, subscribe, and the notification bell, as otherwise that pesky algorithm will continue to suppress my videos from your feed.